My grandfather found me sleeping in a women's shelter and calmly asked, "What about the trust fund I set up for you?" Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had no answer, because I never knew that money existed. My name is Bryn. After my parents died, I was sent to live with my Aunt Cora and her husband Miles. They told everyone they were saving money for my future. I believed them. I trusted them. When I turned 18, they said I had to leave because they could not afford me anymore. They promised I would be fine on my own. I wasn't. College never happened. Jobs came and went. One bad year turned into many. Eventually, I ended up in a shelter, carrying everything I owned in one bag. I felt invisible. I felt forgotten. The shelter volunteer asked my last name one day. 2 weeks later, my grandfather Hale walked in. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. He asked why I never used the trust fund he created for me after my parents passed away. That was the moment my whole life cracked open. There was a trust. Enough to pay for school, housing, and basic needs. My aunt and uncle had full control. They told my grandfather I was reckless and ungrateful. They took the money while I struggled to survive. Hale didn't yell. He gathered records. Lawyers stepped in. The truth came out. The house they bought was taken. The lies stopped working. I didn't celebrate. I just moved forward. I got a small apartment. I enrolled in classes. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just getting your life back. My name is Bryn. There was a time when my life felt steady and safe. I grew up believing family meant protection and honesty. When everything I knew suddenly collapsed, I was too young to understand how fast security can disappear. After the accident that took both my parents, my world went quiet. The house felt empty. Decisions were made around me, not with me. That's when my Aunt Cora stepped forward with her husband, Miles. They spoke gently, told me I would stay with them, said I didn't need to worry anymore. I wanted to believe them. I needed to. At first, things seemed normal. I went to school, did chores, followed rules. But slowly, I noticed changes. Conversation stopped when I entered the room. Mail addressed to me was opened without explanation. Questions were brushed off with short answers. I was told adults handled complicated matters and that I should focus on being grateful. As the years passed, I felt more like a burden than family. Every request felt like too much. New clothes were delayed. School plans were ignored. When I asked about my future, I was told to be patient. When I asked again, I was told I was being difficult. I learned to stay quiet. I learned not to ask. I believed this was just how life worked after loss. I thought needing help meant weakness. I thought loyalty meant silence. By the time I reached adulthood, I had nothing saved, no guidance, and no support. I walked out of that house with a small bag and a forced smile, convinced this struggle was my fault. Looking back, that was the moment everything began to fall apart. Not because I failed, but because I trusted people who never planned to protect me at all. Turning 18 felt less like a milestone and more like an ending. One morning, Cora sat me down and spoke in a calm, careful tone. She said expenses were rising and sacrifices had to be made. Miles stood nearby, arms crossed, nodding without meeting my eyes. The message was clear: I was no longer welcome. There was no argument, no warning, no plan. A few weeks earlier, I had been filling out school forms, dreaming of a classroom and a fresh start. Overnight, those dreams disappeared. The forms were thrown away. The future I imagined was quietly erased. I packed what little I owned and left without a goodbye dinner or a hug. They handed me a small amount of cash and said I would figure things out. The door closed behind me, and that house was suddenly no longer mine. I tried staying in touch. I called to ask for advice, for help finding work, for simple reassurance. The phone rang and rang. Messages stayed unread. I wrote notes, hoping words on paper might reach where my voice could not. Nothing came back. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Silence settled in like a heavy fog. I replayed every conversation, searching for what I did wrong. I wondered if I had been ungrateful. I questioned whether I asked for too much. I blamed myself for needing help at all. Without guidance, I stumbled. I took short-term jobs, slept on couches, moved constantly. Each unanswered call felt like confirmation that I was no longer wanted. Each empty mailbox felt like proof that I didn't matter. I began to believe their absence was deserved. That if I were better, stronger, easier to love, someone would have stayed. I accepted the idea that I had been let go because I had no value left to offer. That belief followed me everywhere, shaping every decision I made next. Time moved forward, but my situation sank lower. Temporary places faded, work dried up, and stability slipped through my hands. Eventually, I ended up somewhere I never imagined, sharing a room with strangers, lining up quietly each night, holding on to a thin blanket like it was armor. Every day became a calculation. Coins mattered. Meals depended on what I could manage with what little I had left. I learned which corners were safest, which hours were calmest, and how to disappear into the background. I kept my head down. I spoke only when required. I stopped looking at reflective surfaces. Seeing myself felt too heavy. The person staring back looked older, worn down, unfamiliar. Dreams felt dangerous, so I pushed them away. Expecting less hurt less. Believing in nothing felt safer than believing in something that could vanish. I told myself this was temporary, even when I stopped believing it. Nights were the hardest. Thoughts grew louder in the dark. Regret, doubt, and quiet anger kept me awake long after lights went out. I wondered how my life had narrowed down to survival alone. One afternoon, while helping sort donated items, a staff member struck up a casual conversation. She asked simple questions, nothing personal at first. Then she paused, looked up, and asked for my last name. Her tone changed slightly, like something clicked. I answered without thinking. Just another detail, or so I believed. She became unusually quiet. Later, she returned and said someone had been asking about family connections tied to that name. I brushed it off, assuming it meant nothing. Too many disappointments had trained me not to expect results. Still, something shifted inside me. A strange tension settled in my chest. Not excitement. Not fear. Just a feeling that something long buried had been stirred. That single question, so ordinary, so small, cracked open a door I thought had been sealed forever. I didn't know it yet, but the life I accepted as final was about to be questioned. A few days after that brief conversation, I was asked to wait near the entrance. No explanation was given. I assumed it was paperwork or another routine request. Instead, an older man stepped inside, scanning the room like he was searching for something lost. When our eyes met, he froze. His face changed in seconds, surprise, confusion, then a deep, restrained fury. He walked toward me slowly, as if afraid I might vanish. I recognized him immediately, though years had passed. My chest tightened, and my hands began to shake. He said my name quietly, like testing if it was real. I nodded, unable to speak. For a moment, neither of us moved. The noise around us faded, leaving only the weight of what stood between us. His gaze moved over me, taking in everything I tried to hide. The condition of my clothes. The exhaustion in my posture. His jaw clenched, but his anger wasn't aimed in my direction. It was sharp, controlled, and focused elsewhere. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't scold me or offer comfort. Instead, his voice dropped as he asked how this could have happened. His words carried disbelief, not judgment. Like the outcome in front of him broke every assumption he had been living with. I felt small, exposed, and confused all at once. I had imagined this moment differently, if I ever imagined it at all. I expected shame or disappointment. I expected to be blamed. None of that came. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. His expression softened, but his eyes stayed intense. He said there was something we needed to talk about, something that made no sense given what he knew. That was when I realized this meeting wasn't an accident. Something important had been misunderstood for a long time. As we sat down together, I sensed that the story I had believed for years was about to be challenged, and that the truth might be heavier than I was prepared to face. We sat across from each other in a quiet room, the air thick with unspoken questions. Hale rested his hands on the table, steady but tense. He studied my face like he was searching for answers written there. Then he began to explain, slowly, carefully, as if each word carried weight. After the loss of my parents, he said, he took steps to make sure I would never struggle. He described arrangements meant to last years, not months. Plans designed to grow with me, to support education, shelter, and unexpected needs. Everything had been set up with intention and care. I listened, confused. None of this sounded familiar. He spoke as if I had choices I never remembered having. As if help had always been within reach. My silence told him enough. His expression darkened when he realized this information was new to me. He asked questions, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. I had no answers to give. I could only shake my head as he mentioned access, oversight, and regular updates he believed were happening. Each sentence widened the gap between what he thought my life was and what it had actually become. He paused often, collecting himself. His voice didn't rise, but the tension in it grew. He explained how every detail had been arranged to protect me until I could stand on my own. Nothing was meant to be rushed or taken lightly. I felt numb as the picture came together. Opportunities one never knew existed. Stability I never felt. Support that should have been there during my hardest years. Hale leaned back, exhaling sharply. What troubled him most wasn't the money itself, but the purpose behind it. Those resources were meant to give me freedom, not leave me stranded. They were designed to open doors, not close them. In that moment, I understood something had been deeply misused. A future meant for me had been redirected without my knowledge. While I struggled in silence, a carefully built safety net had been quietly removed. That truth settled heavily between us, changing everything. Hale didn't rush. He moved with intention, pulling records, requesting statements, comparing timelines. I watched as his calm focus replaced shock. Each document revealed another quiet manipulation. Names appeared where mine should have been. Approvals existed that I never gave. Authorizations carried handwriting I didn't recognize. Numbers told their own story. Funds shifted between accounts that had nothing to do with my needs. Payments meant for education or living support were rerouted elsewhere, disguised as expenses or transfers. It became clear this wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Guardianship authority had been stretched far beyond its limits. Decisions were made without consent. Access was restricted. Oversight was blocked. Paperwork painted a picture of irresponsibility attached to me, claims I couldn't manage basic matters, suggestions that supervision was necessary. None of it matched reality. Hale's frustration deepened, not through anger, but through disbelief at how easily lies had been constructed. He pointed out altered dates, mismatched signatures, missing confirmations. Every page added another layer of deception. What hurt most wasn't the loss itself. It was reading statements that described me as reckless, unreliable, incapable. Those words explained the distance, the silence, the excuses. They were used as justification, a shield to hide behind while resources disappeared. As the truth surfaced, clarity followed. Cora and Miles hadn't acted out of desperation. They acted with confidence, assuming no one would look closely enough to challenge them. They relied on trust, Hale's trust, to remain unquestioned. I felt anger rise, then fade into something colder. Understanding replaced confusion. My struggles hadn't been caused by failure. They were the result of calculated decisions made without my knowledge. Hale gathered everything into a single file, methodical and precise. He didn't speak much during that process. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke clearly enough. What had been taken wasn't just financial support. It was time, direction, possibility. And now that the truth existed on paper, it couldn't be ignored or explained away. The story they created about me was unraveling, line by line. The meeting took place in a familiar space that no longer felt welcoming. I sat across from Cora and Miles, steadying my breath. My hands stayed still. My voice stayed level. There was no anger left to release, only certainty. I began by listing details. Dates. Amounts. Decisions made without my awareness. I spoke slowly, making sure every point landed. They exchanged quick glances, then laughed lightly, brushing it off as confusion. Miles claimed misunderstandings. Cora insisted everything had been done for my benefit. I didn't interrupt. I let them speak. Their explanations tangled over themselves, shifting blame, avoiding specifics. Each response felt rehearsed, hollow, disconnected from the reality I now understood. Hale remained quiet until the right moment. He reached into his folder and placed the stack of records between us. Pages slid across the surface, heavy with proof. The room changed instantly. Cora's expression froze. Miles stopped talking mid-sentence. The confidence they carried evaporated as they scanned the pages. Signatures stared back at them. Transfers traced their actions clearly. There was nowhere left to redirect responsibility. The silence that followed was complete. No excuses. No justifications. Just the sound of breath and the weight of exposure. I watched them realize that the story they built had collapsed. I felt no urge to raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts spoke clearly, and they spoke for me. For years, I had been dismissed without explanation. Now, every missing answer was present in ink. Hale finally broke the quiet, his tone controlled but firm. He asked them to explain what could not be explained away. They couldn't. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The shame I carried for so long lifted. I understood that my silence back then wasn't weakness. It was survival. I stood up before anyone else moved. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't demand regret. I had already reclaimed the truth, and that was enough. Behind me, the room remained still, filled with everything they could no longer deny. Once the truth could no longer be dismissed, everything moved quickly. Professionals were brought in, not to argue emotions, but to address violations. Conversations shifted from denial to procedure. Forms were filed. Timelines were reconstructed. Accountability became unavoidable. Restrictions were placed immediately. Access they once treated as permanent was cut off. Accounts were locked down, transactions halted midstream. What had been quietly taken over years was suddenly visible, measured, and challenged. Control slipped from their hands without drama, only consequence. Attention turned to property obtained through improper means. The home they lived in, once a symbol of comfort and success, became evidence. Ownership was questioned. Claims were reviewed. Its walls no longer represented security but liability. What had been built using resources meant for my future was no longer protected. Their behavior changed fast. Confidence collapsed into desperation. Messages arrived asking for understanding. Voices softened. Explanations shifted toward remorse. They spoke of intentions, hardships, mistakes. None of it aligned with the precision of what had been uncovered. For the first time, I was not the one asking for compassion. I listened, detached, as they searched for leniency. The same people who once closed doors now asked for grace they never offered. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. The process continued without my interference. Outcomes were decided by facts, not feelings. What mattered was no longer how things appeared, but what could be proven. Watching this unfold felt strange. Not satisfying. Not painful. Just final. The imbalance that shaped my life was being corrected, step by step, without spectacle. They wanted forgiveness before responsibility. That request arrived too late. Consequences were already in motion, guided by rules they had assumed would never apply to them. I realized then that justice doesn't require anger. It doesn't need revenge. It only needs truth and time. And once those align, even the loudest excuses fade into irrelevance. What remained was silence again, but this time, it belonged to them. I watched quietly as events unfolded, letting each action speak louder than words ever could. I didn't raise my voice, didn't shout accusations, didn't stage dramatic confrontations. Instead, I focused on clarity, ensuring every detail of the truth was undeniable and visible to those who needed to see it. Each consequence arrived without fanfare. Accounts were corrected, property reassigned, decisions reversed. I didn't need to intervene personally. Time and procedure carried the weight of justice, and I observed the natural outcome. Every move they had made in secrecy was now exposed through careful documentation and oversight. I felt a calm satisfaction, not anger. Watching them face the results of their own choices was enough. I didn't need to humiliate them, confront them daily, or seek revenge in the traditional sense. Silence and patience became my allies. At night, I reflected on the years I had lost and the quiet strength I had discovered. My focus shifted from what had been taken to what I could rebuild. Each correction in the system, each acknowledgement of wrongdoing, was a subtle victory. I realized that revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, it's measured. Sometimes, it's letting life itself enforce fairness. Seeing the effects of honesty, accountability, and truth unfold before my eyes was far more powerful than any dramatic act of retaliation. In that quiet observation, I found control. I had been powerless for years, but now I could witness consequences happen naturally, without compromise. Each step they took, each correction made, reaffirmed the choice I had quietly made, to trust truth, and let it speak louder than emotion ever could. By the end, I felt a sense of closure. My victory wasn't visible to anyone else, it was internal, measured, and complete. With the remaining trust finally accessible, a sense of possibility returned. I wasn't rich, but I had enough to plan carefully, to take control of my own life for the first time in years. The feeling was unfamiliar but grounding. I enrolled in classes I had once dreamed about, choosing subjects that sparked curiosity rather than obligation. Each lecture, each assignment, felt like a small reclamation of time lost. I absorbed knowledge with determination, aware that every moment now belonged to me and no one else. Finding a place to live became my next step. I rented a modest apartment, plain but mine. Walking through the door for the first time alone, I felt the weight of independence settle around me. No interference, no hidden agendas, just space to exist on my own terms. Daily routines became rituals of rebuilding. Grocery trips, paying bills, setting schedules, ordinary tasks felt monumental after years of instability. Every decision reinforced the sense that my life was finally mine to shape. I also reconnected with small joys I had neglected. Quiet mornings with coffee, walks in the park, evenings spent reading or reflecting. Freedom came not in extravagance, but in the ability to choose. Even setbacks felt different. Mistakes no longer carried shame imposed by others. They became lessons, part of the effort to move forward consciously. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was a victory earned through effort, not given by someone else's decisions. For the first time in a long time, I could imagine a future with possibility. Stability was fragile but real, built on my own perseverance. Slowly, quietly, I was no longer surviving, I was living. This reclamation was more than financial or practical, it was emotional. Each step strengthened the understanding that I could rebuild, that I deserved it, and that nothing stolen could take away the resolve I now carried. Months later, Cora reached out. Her voice was hesitant, careful, carrying the weight of months spent in reflection. She asked if we could talk, if I could hear her out. I agreed, not because I owed her anything, but because I needed closure for myself. When we met, she didn't defend her choices. She spoke slowly, admitting mistakes she had long avoided, acknowledging the impact of her actions. I listened, letting her words flow without interruption, observing the effort behind them. Anger bubbled briefly, but I let it pass. I didn't need to punish her further. My role was no longer to react, but to witness, to choose how I responded. As she spoke, I felt the release that comes from understanding, even when that understanding doesn't excuse wrongdoing. When she finished, I told her I forgave her. Not because I condoned what happened, but because holding on to resentment would only continue to hurt me. Saying the words aloud felt like a weight lifting, a quiet liberation I had been waiting for. At the same time, I set firm boundaries. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to the past or reopening doors that had been closed. Distance became the safeguard, the line between reclaiming my life and being drawn back into old patterns. For the first time, I felt the difference between letting go and giving in. I could honor my own growth without relying on her change. The conversation ended calmly, a rare quiet in a story marked by chaos. Walking away, I felt strength rooted in clarity. Freedom came not from revenge, not from retaliation, but from knowing I could release the past while keeping myself intact. Forgiveness had become my shield, distance my protection, and the lessons of betrayal my guide for the future. Now, I focus on building a life that reflects my choices, my effort, and my resilience. Every morning begins with intention. Every decision is made with awareness of the past but without being controlled by it. I plan carefully, saving, learning, and taking opportunities that align with the life I want. I'm no longer weighed down by anger. The hurt still exists, but it no longer dictates my steps. I've discovered that strength comes from endurance and clarity, from recognizing what I can control and letting go of what I cannot. Betrayal taught me caution, but also awareness. Not everyone who harms you is unknown. Some of the deepest wounds come from people who should have protected you. Accepting that reality doesn't make me bitter, it makes me prepared. Revenge, I realized, doesn't have to involve confrontation or spectacle. Its most powerful form is reclaiming what was taken and refusing to let the violation define your life. It is measured, quiet, and centered on growth rather than destruction. I built routines, friendships, and goals that reflect independence. I work toward achievements that are solely mine. Every step forward reinforces that the past, no matter how painful, cannot erase what I create now. I still carry lessons from the hardship, vigilance, patience, and self-reliance, but they serve me rather than limit me. The life I'm shaping is one of intention, security, and dignity. Looking back, I see a path from helplessness to autonomy. The struggles, betrayals, and quiet victories have led me here. I am not just surviving anymore, I am constructing a future grounded in strength, clarity, and peace. In the end, walking away whole is the victory. It is quiet, complete, and mine. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from them, or should I have given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.